By now, you've probably binge-watched all 8 episodes of The Midnight Gospel, including the absolutely heart-wrenching season finale. If you're like me, you've already watched each episode twice, and I definitely caught a lot more on my second watch-through. But if you haven't caught up with all of Season 1, hit pause on this video and finish watching before you tune back in. I'm Whitney Van Lanningham, and today we're talking about everything you missed in Season 1 of The Midnight Gospel, including what its ending means for the future of this series. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our super nerd sponsor of the day, Lauren Linton. You're our Daniel Hoops, Lauren! Want to help us out too? Click the link in the description box and see if any of our Patreon donation tiers work for you. If swag is more your style, consider clicking our affiliate link to TeePublic, where we just added a bunch of Tiger King shirts to our storefront. Now on to Midnight Gospel! The first question I had after watching the pilot was, what's Clancy gonna do with all these shoes? Obviously, it becomes a lot more clear after you watch a few more episodes, but Clancy collects shoes from all of the planets he visits as souvenirs of where he's been. My take is that this is a pretty literal metaphor for walking a mile in someone else's shoes, which Clancy obviously does as he interviews all different life forms across the galaxy. You might have noticed repeated references to crow's milk. In the first episode, there's a book in the White House called Milk the Crow. And side quest, there's also a book called Don't Nuke, Don't Tell, which is hilarious. But then you'll see in episode 4 a boy literally drinking milk from the teat of a crow, and the witch in that episode even makes her potions from crow's milk. The production company Oatmeal Maiden even has a lactating crow as its mascot. So what gives? Well, all my research points to this being a popular inside joke from the Duncan Trussel Family Hour podcast, the podcast where all the dialogue from this show is from. Obviously, all you Duncan Trussel superfans are totally free to come in and correct me, but it seems like Duncan was so enamored by the fight milk bit from Always Sunny in Philadelphia that it morphed and found new life on his podcast. I'm guessing there are a bunch more DTFH inside jokes hidden throughout the series, so let me know in the comments if you regular listeners caught any. That said, I do have expertise in the other co-creator, Penn Ward, and I picked up on a few Adventure Time homages throughout the show. To start off, the first episode has a zombie king with a crown that looks remarkably similar to the Ice King's. Then, in episode 2, one of the freedom fighters brandishes a sword that looks just like Finn's golden sword Scarlet. Episode 4 has a gaseous world-destroying mist reminiscent of the Lich, and there's even a little Shelby lookalike in episode 6 who tragically gets stuck in some yellow wobble and explodes out of her meat suit. Seeing all of these things started my brain on a new conspiracy theory, that Oo was one of the planets in Clancy's universe simulator. With infinite possibilities within the simulator, it could happen. In episode 5, we travel into the universe simulator's soul prison, where inmates suffering from existential dread are essentially killed and brought back to life over and over, while the wardens or gods or whatever these guys are weigh their soul against a feather, hoping to achieve lightness and balance. Unfortunately, the simulated being trapped in the soul prison has to go through this painful, grueling process hundreds of times before they're able to join Indra's net and ascend. There's a lot to unpack here. First, what's with the feathers and the scale and the plucking of the heart from the chest? In ancient Egyptian mythology, there was a crocodile demoness named Ammit who lived near the scales of justice. It was said that after you died, Anubis, the god of death, would weigh your heart against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. If your heart was pure, you were allowed to carry on your journey towards Osiris, god of the afterlife, and immortality. If your heart weighed more than the feather, however, Ammit would devour your heart, and your soul would be trapped and restless for all of eternity. Second, what is this Sisyphusian nightmare prison situation exactly? Jason Louv, the bird, mentions it briefly, but this epiphanic prison is located in the Bardo, which Tibetan Buddhists believe to be the transitional state between death and rebirth. It's kind of interesting that the show mixed Egyptian mythology and Tibetan Buddhism to give us this insane acid trip nightmare of a place. Also, what's Indra's net? Who's Indra? Obviously in the show, it's a literal net that soul prisoner Bob eventually joins after reaching enlightenment. But in real life, it's another traditional Buddhist ideology. The best way to think about it is like a spider web covered in dewdrops. Within each of the dewdrops is the reflection of all the other dewdrops, and within those reflections are the reflections of the reflection of those dewdrops, and so on and so forth forever infinity. Within each dewdrop, the entire universe is thus contained, and so it is with all living creatures. Indra's net is a concept that depicts that everything in existence shares this universal interconnection, and also that the self is simply one in the infinite reflections of reality. Indra himself is a Hindu deity and Buddhist guardian, but that's not all. He's also the god of thunder! You guys, Indra is basically Buddhist Thor. I had no idea Buddhists even had their own Thor! I love the penultimate episode when Clancy meets death in the bottom of his man purse. But did you notice that some of the key characters we run into throughout the episode are actually inspired by a deck of tarot cards? Clearly the hose thief is the Fool, Death is Death, and Judgment is Judgment, but some of the others were a little harder to spot. Oh, speaking of Judgment, did you notice that Clancy is totally jerking it in one of the mirrors? Ta, penis. Anyway, next we meet the Devil, the Emperor, the Empress, the Magician, and the Sun. In the end, the Devil, Judgment, the Fool, the Emperor, and Clancy form 6 of the 10 points of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. What's that? Well, Kabbalah is a mystical interpretation of Judaism that began hundreds of years ago, and not in 2006 by Madonna like I originally thought, and explores some of the more supernatural qualities of Judaism. The Tree of Life is used as a symbol for many mystic religions, and the Kabbalistic Tree of Life is no different. Each of the 10 nodes, or Sephirot, are the attributes in which Ein Sof, aka the god of Kabbalah, reveals himself to his followers. The 22 lines connecting them represent different spiritual paths, and each one may have different kinds of values or electric charges or types of ceremonial magic. Also, loved the shout out to Sharon, the ferryman of Hades. Look at his cute little Elton John penny glasses! According to ancient Greek tradition, Sharon would only take a soul to the afterlife if he was paid a boat faring coins, or obols. This is why bodies were buried with coins on their eyes. There was also a Cyclops down in Hades, which is interesting because in Greek mythology, Hades reduced the Cyclops' eyeball count down to 1 so that they could see into the future and predict the exact day of their death. Finally, we have to talk about Silver Mouse, the final episode of Season 1, and hands down one of the most beautiful tearjerkery episodes of a cartoon I've ever seen. First question, is that a real interview with Duncan Trussel's mom? Yep. However, in episode 7, we hear Clancy mention to Death that both of his parents have already crossed over to the other side, so this is clearly an episode of the Duncan Trussel Family Hour that was taped before Duncan's mom, Deneen Fendig, passed away in 2013. You can listen to part 2 of his interview with her on episode 64 of the podcast. This episode is truly a beautiful tribute to his mom, but if you want to hear more, definitely give that TDTFH ep a listen. Next, I'm sure you're wondering how Clancy gave birth to his mom. Obviously, the mushroom spores got him pregnant, but did she pop out of his bee-hole or a simulated V-slat? Never fear, for another Netflix show already taught us the answer to this question. That body cavity right there is called a bussy, and if you have to look it up, use incognito mode. But giving birth to your parent is kinda weird, right? Like, why did it happen in the first place? For starters, this show started setting up for a male birth scene in episode 2, when Clancy interviewed Anne the deer dog, aka narrative nonfiction writer Anne Lamott. When they're talking, Anne describes heaven like the overwhelming feeling of being in labor with both contractions and release that symbolize the pain and acceptance of death. I believe that Clancy giving birth to his own mom was his way of trying to experience both what Anne said about how dying will feel like labor, and also, of course, to experience what his mom lived through. I've never personally had a dream or hallucination about bringing a bouncing baby mom or dad into the world, but this isn't the first place I've seen this symbolism used. One of my favorite movies of all time is an acid trip version of Aladdin created by musician Adam Green. In it, Aladdin's father instructs him to cut open the lamp, which represents a penis, in order to give birth to his father. I'm not sure if this is some kind of common hallucination that multiple people have had, but this is now the second trippy thing I've seen that includes the imagery of a son giving birth to his mother or father. Dreams about giving birth in general, however, are very common, so perhaps Duncan and Penn borrowed the symbolism from dream interpretation. According to many dream experts, dreaming about your mother giving birth usually means that you're witnessing your mom go through a big life transition, like starting a new project or a new relationship. Although Clancy doesn't see his mom giving birth in the episode, perhaps that interpretation was borrowed from, as death is hands down the biggest life transition a person can experience. While we're on the subject of symbolism, what did it mean for Clancy to get those spoon shoes from the VR bus? This might be really random, but I found an anonymous psychics website that claimed that seeing a spoon could mean that you have lost your body, or are having an out-of-body experience. Obviously, at the end of Season 1, Clancy had given up his meat suit to live inside his universe simulator, so maybe the spoons he slides onto his feet as he boards the bus represent the fact that he's lost his corporeal form. Spoons and the Spoon Man were also seen earlier in the 5th episode, when Clancy and Jason are discussing reality being all but a dream to Buddhists. What's particularly interesting about this scene is that Bob is able to use the spoons to make music and save his life from the guard. I think this might lend spoons to represent presence of mind and making the most of what you have in the moment. Under this assumption, Clancy's new spoon shoes would represent staying mindful in the present to live life to the fullest. So we know that Clancy's body's probably gone for good after Mr. Dickbag Hoops crashed his crib, but does this mean that he's dead or alive in the virtual afterlife? We don't really get a straight answer. Clancy's seatmate on the bus refuses to answer him when he asks if he's bit the dust or not, and there's no additional hint to the viewer as to where they're headed. They might have done it this way just in case they don't get greenlit for season 2. It would be the perfect open-ended way to end the series, especially after that impossible-to-top animated tribute to Duncan's mom. That said, in a Reddit AMA, Trussel confirmed that a second season is not off the table if the show does well. I think the in-show evidence also points to Clancy surviving. Firstly, Death tells him flat out that he's gonna die on a rolly chair, which he is clearly not on. Also, when his neighbor pulls his kids into their universe simulator before their planet explodes, he says that they will forfeit their bodies to live in the electric life. Obviously, this guy must know that it's possible to live on in the virtual world, and that's why he quickly saves his kids by making sure their souls could live on inside the US. But who knows? Maybe the second season will take place in a legitimate afterlife and not a San Junipero sim. These are just some of my thoughts on the season finale of The Midnight Gospel, but I want to know what you guys think about the ending in the comments. Did you catch any other symbolism? Do you think that Clancy is like, dead? Like and subscribe to Nerdwire, and I'll be back next week to seek revenge on Daniel Hoop's weird wizard dad for killing that ice cream unicorn.